Good afternoon. Welcome to week 2 of the FAIR Foundation virtual conference series, Building a Culture of Preparedness. Our theme for week 2 is Resiliency Public Policy. We're happy to partner with the Pew Charitable Trust, and we have an exciting lineup, starting with the panel that's about ready to start of distinguished mayors on urban resiliency. At 3 o'clock, we have a panel on resiliency through mitigation. And tomorrow, a really fantastic lineup with flood risk management, including a bonus panel by Matthew Eby of the First Street Foundation, who just came up with a tool that allows all homeowners within the 48 contiguous states to go online and see what their true flood risk is with a very useful model. But now we have our panel of mayors. I'd like to introduce our moderator, good friend, former Buckeye, or fellow Buckeye, I should say, Ron Klein, a former member of the United States Congress, a current shareholder with the law firm Holland and Knight. Ron's a real leader on resiliency issues. And so without further ado, welcome Representative Ron Klein.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks to everybody participating today. We're going to talk about a number of issues, but the title of this particular panel is Urban Resiliency, and we brought together an outstanding group of mayors from our country who are experiencing different forms of issues, challenges that relate to water, climate, and all those kinds of things. They've been chosen to participate in this panel because of the nature of things going on in their local communities. So they're going to be able to share some experiences, talk about the severity of weather events. We know that the frequency, the severity of the types of weather events that are affecting the United States and other places around the world are really creating challenges in our cities and our communities. And from a planning point of view, and obviously from an operational point of view and a taxpayer questions of how you take care of them from a lifestyle and cost. So we're going to have the chance to hear from our mayors. You've got a bio on each of those panelists that I'm going to introduce. So a lot of detail there. They'll tell you about their background, their experiences, and we're going to sort of move right into this. But let me just by name introduce our panels. We have Mayor Dan Gelber, an old friend, and I did see a heat little flash in the back there before you got your back up there. So big night to start, of course. Welcome, Mayor Gelber. We are Mayor Van Johnson from the beautiful city of Savannah, Georgia. Mayor, welcome, and it is a beautiful city. I've been there many times, and we appreciate your perspective today. We also have Mayor Dean Trantalis from the city of Fort Lauderdale, also in South Florida, been facing a number of different challenges and really leading on the cutting edge of responses and anticipatory planning for these types of issues. And last but not least, we had Mayor Castor from the city of Tampa scheduled to join us. She had a last-minute call away, but we're very fortunate to have Reamer, who is the Chief Resilience Officer, who I think the mayor would probably tell us is her brains and her eyes and ears on these issues, and will be able to share with us the experiences that they're having in Tampa. So without further ado, let's move right into our program and the opportunity to hear from our members, our mayors, and the staff. So let me pose the first question to each one of you, and we'll just go through one by one. If you could share a minute or two, as a mayor of a big city, what are the issues that you're facing relating to sea level rise and other types of climate impacted conditions that sort of keep you up at night? What are the things that really you have to focus on and the concerns that you have? Why don't we start with Mayor Johnson? I need you to unmute.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share with these distinguished public servants. For me, some of the things that really concern me is that we have, and we've all experienced it, more intense and frequent storm events and threats to our residents, local economy, and natural ecosystems. I'm just here over the last couple of days, we have had torrential rains here in Savannah. And that, certainly concerns me, keeps me up at night. The Georgia coast has experienced 4 hurricanes in the previous 4 years, and it's resulted in 3 evacuations of our local area. Prior to that, it was 1999 with Hurricane Floyd. And about 70% of our major flooding events have occurred since 2015. So it's very clear to me that obviously things have changed, they've shifted in a large way. And so we're seeing the results of that as it impacts our city. And so in the midst of what we're going through as it relates to the pandemic and now the changing situations, we're also now in the midst of the height of our hurricane season. It's usually September through October. And the fact is, if we had to evacuate this time, where do we evacuate to? Do we evacuate to a city that's a hot spot or hotter than we are? So it's a multifaceted issue. But as a result, I don't sleep much at all.
We look well rested, but thank you for your opener.
It's makeup.
Mayor Trantalis, please.
Thank you, Ron. Just to back up what the mayor said, I think Mayor Gelber and I have gotten really good at deflecting hurricanes away from our coast. We either shoot them up north or out into the Gulf, and it's a very special talent, but I think we've developed it, thank God. No, but seriously, when I wake up in the morning and I see in the newspaper that 14 miles of Greenland has broken off, and the iceberg is floating south and melting and raising the level of the sea, it just makes me understand more and more how our reaction to rising sea levels is so important. This past week and the week before, we suffered from the king tide spectacle. And what is that? It's a naturally occurring, high tide, but it's exacerbated, of course, by the fact that it starts out high to begin with. So, in fact, this year was 16 inches higher than what we anticipated. 16 inches is a lot of elevation. And what we're doing in our community, we're certainly encouraging and requiring new seawalls to be built higher. The city's rebuilding all of its seawalls so that they're higher and they don't flood the streets. And we're also taking charge of our freshwater treatment plant, and we're moving it away from the where it is today, moving it further inland, closer to our well fields, and trying to ensure that our source for fresh water is not going to be diluted or in any way what's the word I'm thinking of, put at risk with saltwater intrusion. So the point is that there are so many ways that we need to respond to climate change, and those are just some of the capital improvements that we have to do. As far as everyday life, trying to make sure that each and every consumer of water, is much more responsible and doesn't waste water that we do have, and it becomes a challenge for all of us to fully understand how climate change is going to be an everyday sort of part of our life going forward, because we cannot stop the rise in sea level. It's going to continue to happen until we understand how important it is to get away from fossil fuels. And I'd like to think that over the next generation, the world will be using less and less fossil fuels and will be more responsible in trying to find methods to use renewable resources that will hopefully close that ozone gap, and we'll be able to see a moderation of the ice caps melting, and we won't have to feel as though we're being impacted so heavily by the saltwater intrusion. So those are the things that, in terms of climate change, I feel that our city and Florida in general is most concerned about how we're trying to respond to it.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Gelber, please.
Nice to see you again, Ron.
You too.
And thank you for inviting me. So last night, LeBron James on a fast break scared me and kept me up at night because we're playing here tonight. But other than LeBron James, you know, I grew up in this city. I was born here, and you know, for many years, what would keep my dad was the mayor of the city in the 90s during Hurricane Andrew, and frankly, it was that kind of event that would keep a city official worried and a lot of people, you know, a hurricane. But today it's different. We send out notices of king tides to our residents right now because we have sunny day flooding. We have rain bombs. You know, we actually realize that our quality of life could be assaulted if we don't do anything. So for me, it's really just sort of dealing with, I mean, all of these things together, and they're all climate activity. I think probably we are ahead of a lot of people, not because we're smarter or more courageous, but because we sit at sea level, Barrier Island on porous limestone. So I think we've been sort of the canary in the mine shaft in the sense that we're getting what a lot of other people are getting before they're getting it. So we actually aren't, you know, I always go to these things and there's always someone who stands up and says, we have to learn to live with water and gives all these wonderful statements. We are actually in the business right now of figuring out how to do it, and we're well into it. We are changing our entire stormwater management system, our water management system, from a gravitational one to a pump system. So we're putting pumps throughout the city. We're raising our streets. We've already raised about 7 miles of street and have a new system there to push water out. We're dealing with all the issues that come with raising your streets, by the way. Harmonization of the street to the driveway, all the resident issues, the funding issues, all of those things are coming to light. We've already done so much that we asked for an Urban Land Institute review of our own efforts because we wanted to make sure we were getting it right. We feel like there's not a lot of other folks doing what we're doing, so we're trying to get help in informing our process. So we've done the kinds of things that cities need to do. We've changed our codes, things like that. But we've also learned to incorporate green infrastructure into not only our swales, but really almost every aspect of our city. And we're going from stout, wide buildings to taller and thin buildings because we want more swale and more absorption. So a lot of what we're doing is, I think, what is people are going to be doing everywhere, but we just had to do it first because when you sit literally at sea level, you're going to get those problems. But when you have a $40 billion tax base in a city of 92,000 people, maybe you have the ability to actually spend $500 million or more, you know, on some of these improvements and elements. So our residents have been pretty good. Get a little exasperated with some of the construction and things like that, but I think they realize that your property values are pretty important, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that we just went on a geo bond for about half a billion, and we were rated AA+ because in part the raters referenced our resiliency efforts. So we know that that has a bottom line impact. We just got a higher rating from CRS for our flood insurance rates. So, you know, we're one of the lowest cities in terms of sea level, yet we're still less of a risk now for flood than we were some years ago. So we think we're on the right track, but we're always willing to listen and learn and change what we're doing if we hear better information.
Mayor, one quick question. I know that you and Mayor Trantalis deal with this. You use the term king tides. I'm not sure everybody on this session knows what a king tide is. Just explain what that is.
Well, you know, I was a federal prosecutor for a long time, so my background in celestial movements is a little limited, but it's basically when your tides 3 months a year, really, the tide is higher than it is at other times. It's probably just the alignment of planets and the other things that impact tides. But we have sunny day flooding in my city, and so we will send out a notice to our residents saying it's king tide month, and on this 3-day period, expect higher than typical high tides. And in fact, if you go over some of our causeways, you can see the water creeping in some places that have not elevated their walls, and there's water, you know, coming out and coming onto the streets. So the king tide is a celestial phenomenon that happens when you just have exceptional high tides, and they're about really 2 to 3 months a year, and we're in the middle of it now, and for the next few months, I think. And it's just when I'm not sure if it's when the moon is full or when the moon is not full, but it's basically based on what causes higher tides.
But the issue, of course, is that when you're already starting with higher sea level in your communities in South Florida and other places, that's just adding to it because, and I've seen it.
You can see, if I went over the causeway, if any of you are familiar with my city, there are 3 causeways connecting us to Miami, you would see the water seeping over the sides of some of the causeways that are at basically at sea level. And we're increasing those, we're raising everything, but clearly that, it's a real thing, and it doesn't matter whether there's rain or not. When you have a king tide, you're going to have some flooding, and that's a real thing. It's not a fake thing.
So Whit, why don't you share with us from experiences from the city of Tampa?
Sure. Well, I want to start by thanking you all for allowing me to sit in on behalf of the mayor, and she sends her regards. She got pulled away for a U.S. Conference of Mayors commitment that came up last minute on policing reform, and as you might suspect, as a former police chief, her opinions valued on those. So, and I want to thank you all for sharing the stage with me. I've been here with the city for about 4 months, and Mayor Gelber, I apologize that LeBron kept you up last night, but Steven Stamkos and the entire Tampa Bay Lightning are roaring in my backyard right now. So as I look at my background, I really should have a lightning bolt, not the skyline, but maybe we'll look to share that trophy in a year or so with someone else. But we're happy to have it. So go Bolts. So back to the question, I think you had asked about what are some of the things that keeps Mayor Castor up at night and related to climate change. And I want to start by saying, I thought I knew a lot about climate change and urban resiliency when I took this position. But I have been absolutely amazed at the mayor's vision of how urban resiliency actually stretches beyond the traditional things that we think about in this space, like sea level rise and climate change. I mean, urban resiliency, kind of those shocks and stressors, and that's really what this panel is about, are those short-term acute shocks and those long-term stressors. They reach across so many different sectors. So climate change, it affects housing, it affects transportation, as Mayor Gelber alluded to with raising roads. It affects our stormwater. So to me, I mean, I'm sitting in eviction meetings 1 minute because we've got people out on the streets and we've got really, really hot days, and we know that urban heat island effect and heat stroke affects vulnerable populations. And right now, the projections are that Tampa Bay area will have more than 4 months of a heat index over 105 degrees. So for us, yes, sea level rise is absolutely important, especially our South Peninsula. The Tampa Bay area has already experienced 7.5 or so inches of sea level rise in the last 50 years. And we expect to have between 1.5 to 8 feet by 2100, 8 feet of sea level rise. But sea level rise isn't one of those things, unless you kind of compound king tides on top of it, that I think really is the greatest threat of really any of our cities. It's that storm surge from a hurricane that can be kind of the one and done. And I think that ultimately is what the mayor and our emergency managers and our planners are super concerned about. Yes, we need to plan incrementally for sea level rise. We need to raise our outfall canals. We need to raise our roads. But we still, in the back of our mind, that big one, it's probably what keeps us up at night. So those are my opening remarks. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So let's maybe move to a second question which follows from the first. Some of you already started this. If you could identify probably a single or one of the most important programs you're dealing with right now that you've planned and executed in dealing with either the climate conditions or sea level rise or other water issues that are resiliency issues in your town. Mayor Trantalis, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Ron. I think that the most important thing that we're now dealing with is the fact that our city, and maybe other cities as well, but we've neglected our underground infrastructure. And as a result, we have suffered significant explosions underground of our water and sewer system, much to the detriment of the environment. and causing significant pollution in our waterways. A lot of this is a result of saltwater intrusion, which has come in and has eaten away at our aging pipe system, a system that was installed many decades ago, which had been poorly maintained of late, last 10 years, 12 years, and which now today we are suffering the impact of that neglect. So we are currently engaged in a significant program of rehabilitation, spending several $100 million in bond money, which the whole process got ahead of us. And this commission in particular has been committed to ensuring that we're going to bring Fort Lauderdale back to a level of safety and to make sure that, going forward, that we don't suffer these types of catastrophes that we're now experiencing. So that's part of it. And going forward, it also reminds us of, it's a wake-up call for anything to do with water, not just sewer systems and not just water filtration systems, but also stormwater. And we just borrowed $200 million and identified 7 really troubled areas within our city. We call them adaptation action areas, in which we are going to move forward with creating drainage systems that just don't exist whatsoever. As Mayor Gelber talked about, a pump system. These are part of a total strategy going forward to ensure that these neighborhoods do not suffer the flooding that comes from rainfall and comes from water rising, and just giving these areas of our city a relief from water intrusion as a result of stormwater infiltration. So it's a multitask, multifaceted approach to dealing with water. I know there are parts of the country that are starving from water. We look at California and how, I'm sure they could, the mayor of Savannah is talking about how they've been inundated with water. I'm sure the people in Southern California would appreciate some of that water. It's just flip-flop. Climate change has just completely turned weather systems on its head, and it continues to do so. And so we have a lot of water here. So what we do right now is try to manage it and try to separate the fresh water from the salt water, and to ensure that and in addition to that, dealing with Lake Okeechobee, knowing that the extra rain that falls in our state can be captured there, and instead of it spilling over into our canals and estuaries causing algae blooms, that we move forward aggressively trying to build that C51 reservoir so that we can capture that overflow and use it for future needs should there ever be a drought or should there ever be any kind of interruption in our freshwater system. Those are the types of things that I feel that we as municipalities are dealing with on a city-by-city basis.
Great. Mayor Johnson, can you share with us about Savannah? Mayor Johnson, if you want to unmute and give us some thoughts from Savannah. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have instituted what we call a smart sea level sensor project. It's in collaboration with our county, which is Chatham and Georgia Tech, that deploys high reliability, low cost sea level sensing through our tidally influenced water bodies here in Chatham County. The goal ultimately is, as the mayor said, that we're dealing with a lot of water, and we have to know and have to figure out how to address the issues of water. So we know that some of that deals with data and the proper collection of data, and how do we use this data for not only understanding the situation we're in, but trying to predict how the situations will play out. Hyperlocal data that gives us highly sophisticated forecasting and modeling to improve emergency responses. For us, for inland flooding, our issue here is that Savannah is considered low land. And so when it rains, and if it rains over a very long period of time, and it rains at a certain intensity, we have levels of flooding. It's been said here in Savannah that if we're hit directly by a high hurricane Cat 3 or above, most of Savannah except for our airport and our air base, is totally underwater. And so those are, so the smart sea sensor helps us with that. It's data that allows us to be able to notify and warn citizens of flooding hazards as they occur. Data to inform our long-term infrastructure planning as we move forward. How do we spend money in a more resilient, more sustainable way? And how do we invest those types of things as it relates to capital improvements to streets and sidewalks and sewers. We've also worked with neighborhoods, because we have over 100 neighborhoods, to develop very neighborhood-specific emergency response plans to improve the emergency response. Obviously, there are communities that are closer and more susceptible to issues of flooding and issues of water, and so their plans have to be much different than those that are inland. We've also invested now in what we're calling urban tree nurseries, raising native tree species that are water and saltwater tolerant, and to plant them throughout the lower-lying areas of our city to absorb more stormwater naturally on site. And so it's more of the green infrastructure type of ethos, and promoting our urban tree canopy. And we've added sustainability and resilience and disaster and critical incident management to our strategic plan. And so, obviously they're doing that great work in Tampa, and we, it just makes sense that the issue going forward for us is that if we're not prepared, we have planned to fail. And so, and then I think the final thing is that we have now a much more robust emergency operations plan. It addresses several changes related, such as hurricanes, flooding, severe weather. We're just outside of areas that see tornadoes, so we've had a couple here. We've been blessed not to be severely affected, but we're living in a time where anything is possible.
Very holistic approach. Lot to think about and a lot to cover.
Well,
So
we copy a lot from the folks in Florida.
Well, listen, everyone's picking up best practices from everywhere else, so that's a good way. That's why we're having these kinds of conferences.
Yes.
Let's see, Mayor Gelber, please. You're on mute.
I'm much better on mute. So let me dive a little bit into what we're doing, because some of the challenges we're confronting are, frankly, I think what everybody's going to confront. So our program basically has got a couple different parts to it. One of the main parts, certainly the main hardware part, is to change from a gravitational system to a pump system, which is a pretty big deal. We've got to put pumps throughout the city, and dozens and dozens of them. Then we've got to raise streets, probably 60 to 70 miles of streets, anywhere from a few inches to a few feet, depending upon what standards we're adopting. And then we have to figure out which neighborhoods to do and when to do them. And it's really been quite a process, because if you can imagine, we have neighborhood groups that don't want some of them and do want some of them, depending upon what side of the street they are. We've had to deal with new permitting requirements. We really have gone into this, realizing that creating this much disruption, because it is disruption and cost, you've got to really engage the community. I think we're getting better at it, but we're also trying to learn how to do it better. So we mentioned earlier, we asked the Urban Land Institute to do a ULI study on our program. And they came back and they said, we think your engineering solutions are correct. We think you could do better with some of your green and blue infrastructure. So we now are changing our plan to accommodate that. We then turned to the Columbia Resiliency Accelerator group, who did their own study for us as well. And then we went to, I think it was ICF, what's the name? ICF, who did a business case analysis for us. We don't want to spend all our time analyzing what we're doing. At some point we have to do it. But as we go through it, we are trying to figure out how to explain to people why it's important and to make decisions as to how you sequence things. So for instance, right now, we're sequencing our neighborhoods for their road level raising. And one of the things we're doing is trying to figure out who's going to need it the most and who might be getting their wastewater systems done, their sanitary sewer systems done at the same time, so we don't have to do them again, or which streets happen to be coming in cycle. Because why would you do, we had one neighborhood that 7 or 8 years ago, before we had our program, got its streets redone. Well, had we raised them at that time, they wouldn't be flooding as they are today, but because we just redid the streets, we're not gonna raise them now. They're gonna have to sit for 10 years with some flooding during king tide. And so these are the kinds of decisions we're going through. I will say this, which I think is the most heartening of anything, which is we went to the areas of our city that were flooding the most first. And the one thing that I'm very proud of is that if you look at before and after pictures, and in fact, the after pictures can be at even a higher level of tide. The streets are dry, sometimes bone dry, and they were totally flooded before. So we know that the engineering solution works. We know that it does stop water intrusion. We know also during rain events, whether they're storms, rain bombs, or hurricanes, that those systems can work as well. But we are going through the system right now where the community is, we have debates about where generators are going to go. We had a special commission meeting the other day on just whether we're putting a generator somewhere, because some folks didn't want it near a park, but some didn't want it near a condo. And so a lot of these are going to be solved with technology. But this is what happens when you start to do these programs. You have to find a way to integrate it into the community in a way that's supported, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the support of the residents, then the program is never going to be funded and is never going to be embraced.
That's the long-term answer for sure. Why don't you tell us an example of something that's happening in Tampa that you can highlight as a more significant effort?
Sure. I want to pick up actually on a point that Mayor Gelber made about continuing to kind of reanalyze that wastewater project. And I think that's actually a great approach. Obviously, I think you need to get to work at some point, but that's adaptation at its finest. That's adaptive governments and adaptive policymaking. You look at a solution, you see if it's working, you come back, you reanalyze it. And in some ways, that's exactly some of the plans that we're doing here in Tampa. We're learning, and in a little bit, we're kind of behind the curve, and we're learning from the city of Fort Lauderdale and Miami Beach, because we don't have a climate plan in place, and we certainly haven't had a robust project list to follow that as you guys have. So in some ways, we're kind of designing the airplane and building it too. So I'm happy to say that our city council unanimously passed our largest budget ever 2 weeks ago, $1.3 billion budget. And within that is dedicated funding for our first climate action and equity plan. Now, both of your cities have these types of plans. Ours, I think, is going to be a little different because we've got projects that are already ongoing that need to be informed by climate planning and charrettes and community input. So our plan is going to have both policy recommendations, but I'm also going to ask our consultants and the folks that help us work on this to actually start putting some engineering solutions within that plan, because we don't have time as a city to sit around and develop a whole suite of plans when we've got a $3.2 billion water and wastewater pipes projects that's currently ripping up our streets, a $250 million stormwater program. Those projects need to be informed by climate science and climate policy. So in some ways, we're developing plans and trying to inform projects in real time. The last one I'll kind of mention is we're working with the Resilient Cities Catalyst on developing a resilient roadmap for the city of Tampa. And this is a group of international resilience experts that were formerly part of the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities network, which I think some of your cities have had the pleasure of having chief resiliency officers coordinate with that group. And so they're helping us kind of, again, in real time create these plans, but not losing opportunity to inject some of that knowledge into projects that are already kind of in the ground. So a lot going on.
Okay, great. So the next question I'm going to ask all of you is sort of a big question about, what kind of coordination and support, and that could be in the form of financial or technical support or otherwise, are you getting from other layers of government that you obviously deal with all the time? So, you're all cities, so you have counties, you have state, you have federal. If you're in a state like Florida, there's the Department of Environmental Protection, and there's the South Florida Water Management District or other water management districts in Georgia. I'm sure you have some similar kinds of experiences. So Mayor Johnson, let me start with you. If you can talk to us about the experiences you've had. Are you getting good support? Are you sort of leading? Are other levels of government lagging and dragging in terms of actually providing resources? This is very expensive stuff we're talking about here. So share with us your experience, please.
Thank you. Well, the city's comprehensive plan through our Metropolitan Planning Commission is currently being updated and will include resilient measures that will address local issues. Our staff have been discussing the adoption of a smart home, fortified home standard as our BC EGS is aligned with the criterion that should incentivize builders and homeowners to build resilient homes, lowering recovery and insurance costs. We're currently also pursuing grants through the Community Development Block Grant, disaster relief, mitigation and building resilient infrastructure and communities funds to implement policies that will fortify city infrastructure and improve service delivery. And as I mentioned before, we're collaborating a lot with our local universities, to include the University of Georgia, Chatham County, and other partners as we develop a residence handbook to prepare for natural hazards in Georgia, which will highlight threats and mitigation across and actions that the public can take to be able to strengthen their homes. And finally, I think we've participated in the update of the Chatham County Hazard Mitigation Plan, which identifies critical projects and actions that will improve the city's resilience.
Okay, Mayor Gelber.
So let me be honest. White House has been zero in every way.
That's
nothing. The state, zero in absolutely every way. They did have a resiliency officer for a while, but I think that person was hired by the White House, so there's not one now, I think. So apparently there's only one resilient officer in the country for both all the states and the White House. This is how this is operated. We are Rockefeller City, along with the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County. And so we have what's called a Resilient 305 group. So our county works together incredibly well, because even though we're all Democrats and Republicans, water doesn't really care. And so we're all in it together. And I work with Mayor Suarez and Mayor Jimenez and other mayors on these projects. Then we have what I think is probably one of the best things is we have the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact. If you go and look online, you're going to see that for about more than a decade in South Florida, all the counties have been working together to agree on projections for sea level rise, agree on best practices to reform those and modify those and help them grow. And we have regular conferences. I think the next one's in Key West. We hosted quite a bit. And so all of the staff for all of these counties and cities. So on a county level, we work together. On a regional level, we work together, and then it stops, which is sort of interesting because when a hurricane comes towards us, you know, every guy with a logo shows up, as you all know, looking to make sure that everybody knows they're ready for a possible hurricane. But for a climactic event that is actually here already, we can't find a state or federal official to show up and tell us anything that's helpful. It's zero. So we've been funding it ourselves, and the expertise we've been getting is homegrown or shared from other municipalities or counties. But there is nothing from anywhere else on this. There's no best practices. There's no standards we should be applying. There's no one coming in with a logo saying we're here from the federal government and we're here to help, even though that might be a joke to a lot of people that would have liked it at some point. We're doing it on our own, and unfortunately, my city can do it. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of cities even in the Southeast Florida, and I know the Tampa Bay area is going to be doing something, if they haven't started it already, a similar compact. These should not be local and regional issues. They should be national and state issues. And every single infrastructure decision from the federal government and the state government, and so many of those are pass-throughs, should be informed with climate policy that is forward-thinking and not old, and it's not. So to answer your question bluntly, Ron, and I don't mean to bark on your old entity, the Congress, but there's been no real help from the federal government. The one thing is Congressman Castor has got a group in the House that are, I think, looking at some forward-thinking legislation that would inform infrastructure, but there really has been very little, certainly from the White House, and really nothing from the governor.
Okay, Mayor Trantalis.
Thank you, Ron. I have to agree with what my colleagues have said. I remember attending my first U.S. Conference of Mayors event in Boston a couple of years ago, and then subsequently a National League of Cities event. And the common theme amongst all of us was that, we're on our own. Our state and our federal government, they can't seem to get it together in terms of trying to find ways to assist municipalities and localities like ours with infrastructure projects. We keep being told, well, get some shovel-ready projects together, so when that day comes and the federal government is ready to pull the trigger and start funding some of these projects, it will be ready. But unfortunately, the imperative that we have to move forward is much greater than the patience we can garner in order to wait for that federal project or that federal bill to come our way. In fact, if anything, the state is breathing down our neck because, especially since we've had our own problems with infrastructure, we've had to enter into consent orders. So if you want to ask, well, what's the participation of the state? Well, they're very good at imposing consent orders and trying to make sure that we comply with them. But when it comes to writing a check in order to help pay for some of these things, they're nowhere to be found. So yes, it does fall upon the local municipalities to fund their own projects. Fortunately, we all share, good bond ratings that we can be able to put bonds out at lower interest rates. And but it does impose a heavy burden upon the taxpayers within our community to be able to fund these projects, whether it be stormwater or wastewater or fresh water. And but that's the legacy of this current administration, and we're hoping that whoever is elected at November 3rd, that we can hopefully see some progress on an infrastructure bill, a federal infrastructure bill that will help us moving forward with our projects. Because we do get CDBG money, and we do get some, we can somehow kind of finagle some CARES Act money, but those are pennies compared to the total need, and the total need is enormous. We're not talking millions, we are collectively talking billions, and that's a lot of money. And as what former Senator Everett Dirksen once said, a billion here and a billion there, starts to add up to real money. Well, yes, indeed, it does, and it's a big burden on our individual property owners. Fortunately, our city's budget is not entirely made up of ad valorem property tax, but enough of it is that we impose this, a burden upon them. But we're going to get there. One good thing about self-funding is that we get to decide how the money is spent, and not being told that we have to follow a cookie-cutter program that is often the way federal government works and state government. We can tailor our programs to suit our needs, our particular needs, and having identified what those needs are, we're able to move forward in a way that will ultimately be the best way to spend the money. So we're optimistic that we'll be able to get through this, and it's mostly through the community participation that we've been able to succeed.
Thank you, Mayor Trantalis. Why don't you tell us in Tampa what your experience has been?
Sure. So just a comment to Mayor Johnson real quick. I, in my former role, served as the attorney for that fortified home program that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks on this question. And we had about 10,000 houses there in the Orange Beach area of coastal Alabama that recently performed very, very well, including the Alabama Convention Center there along Orange Beach during a couple of their recent storms. So congratulations to you guys for looking at that really strong building home program. I agree with the other mayors that we need more federal resources, more state resources to meet the hazards and the threats that we are already facing and that we know we'll face in the future. But I will say, we are taking advantage of the opportunities that are out there. And I think the CDBG mitigation program, which has 3 parts that's being administered by the Department of Economic Opportunity here in the state, is really a progressive program. They've got a critical infrastructure portion, a planning portion, and a regular infrastructure portion. There's a lot of money there. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's left over from Irma. So yes, a disconnect between when a storm happens, which was 2017, and when those funds are available. We've got to get better about that. But I've been really encouraged by the folks that are working on that program and the type of innovation they're looking for. Similarly, there's a new FEMA program that replaces the old pre-disaster mitigation program. And to put this in context, right, the federal government has historically underinvested in disaster preparation, right? So we're really good about coming in and spending billions of dollars after a disaster. But, for about a decade, we were spending on average around $200 million on pre-disaster mitigation at FEMA. And yet we were spending tens of billions of dollars on recovery and response. So as part of a federal law that passed 2 years ago, we're going to be taking the federal government will be taking 6% of everything it spends on disaster and moving that amount to preparation. And under that new program called BRIC, which stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, which I know a lot of people are familiar with here, I think FEMA is getting progressive in terms of the types of projects that they're funding. Now, ultimately, we'll see who gets funded and whether those decisions are political or they're meaningful. But as a city, and I think all of your staff are looking at this funding, it's really interesting to see the federal government saying we want to see more creative projects. We just don't want another, pump upgrade that you've had on your shelves as part of your capital improvement plan for the last 10 years. We want to know how that pump station fits into the urban neighborhood, how it's going to, be joined with an urban resiliency park, how it connects to a green trail, and how you might have a microgrid attached to it, really looking cross-departmentally and looking for those co-benefits. So, I don't think we're there yet. And certainly I think more leadership at the federal level is necessary, and to an extent at the state level. We've been recipients of small grants from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Resilient Coastlines program. They've helped us with some grants that look at our building codes and our comprehensive plan in terms of if they're up to date and ready to meet the challenges that we're going to be facing. But I guess I'm optimistic that we're moving in the right direction, but I think we got a long way to go.
Having served with some of you on this panel in state and federal government, I think part of the problem is out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people who are in government, whether it's the executive branch or legislative. I mean, when you're dealing in Congress or even the state legislature, you're dealing with what's pressing at the moment, what's sort of on the front burner. And for people who aren't feeling the same climate change issues that we may feel on this panel, the people in the cities that you all represent, or there are some other kinds of radical things and the exaggeration of the kind of climate changes that are occurring that really are making hurricanes more intense or forest fires more intense, or all those kinds of things. These are real issues out there, but it takes, from the federal side, it takes a nationwide recognition that, hey, we're either going to try to fix some of these problems on the front end, or, as Whit correctly said, we're going to spend tens of hundreds of billions of dollars on the back end, and a lot more expensive to deal with it on the cleanup side, on the back side, than it is on the front side. Not to mention the disruption to people's lives and the economy and all those other things that we go through when we have these situations.
But Ron, the problem is that when you come in at the back end, you look like White Knight, and it's great headlines, And, it's great politics and all that. To do it at the front end is not sexy.
Yeah, right.
We're going to give you $100 million to redo your underground pipes. Well, that never catches a headline. But, if you have a devastating hurricane like we had in the Panhandle that wiped out a whole town, was it Hurricane Michael, I believe it was, coming in and saying, oh, we're the savior, that's really what it all comes down to. And unfortunately, like what you just said, it costs much, much more than coming in at the back end and trying to protect communities and hardening them so that they don't have to risk that damage.
That's true. That's true. Well, so let me, one of our people that's working with us on the backside is Beth. Beth, are there any questions that have come in from our participants that are watching this?
Yes, Congressman, thank you. We've received a few questions already, and I encourage anyone participating, if you have any questions, to submit them in the Q&A section. But I'll begin with the first question we received, which is for you, Mayor Johnson. How do you balance the need for local capital improvements while preserving Savannah's historic charm?
That's the challenge. The fact of the matter is that when General James Oglethorpe came and founded Savannah in 1733, sustainability was not on his mind, and resiliency wasn't on his mind. And so our street grid, and now even things that have happened since then. And Savannah, history is one of Savannah's crown jewels, so to speak. And so it's very hard to be able to maintain it in infrastructure that is intentionally dated. If you want issues in Savannah, you try to remove too much of our historic infrastructure for whatever reason. So for us, it's a matter of planning. It's a matter of partnerships, of being able to look around and find best practices. We're an old city, but we're not the oldest. How are we able to maintain and have this really courageous conversation that we have to be here for others to enjoy our city into the future? And so, it's a series of conversations. It's a series of giving takes. It's compromising, and it's just something that we work daily at. But thank the person that asked the question for acknowledging it is absolutely a challenge.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. And the next question is kind of more of a general question for whoever wants to answer it. It is, what is your approach to getting buy-in from the private sector / seeing culture change among chief executives towards building and supporting a more resilient city?
Mayor, why don't you start, Trantalis, why don't you start with that one?
So I think that the corporate America, especially the building community here in our city, is very much interested in partnering with the city in making sure we have a resilient environment. As new buildings continue to pop up on street after street, block after block, they're fully compliant with all the new rules and regulations. They don't want flooded first floors. We see a lot of compliance, and it's just good business sense. And because if they harden the structure from the beginning, they don't have to suffer the risk damage should a storm enter into our area. So you don't get any pushback whatsoever when it comes to environmental resilience planning and infrastructure. Not at all.
Just whoever else wants to comment and from your own experience.
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. The fact is that resiliency and sustainability is a part of a business plan. It's a business case that can be made and articulated why this makes sense. And so I've pretty much found it easy to have that a conversation because they get it. They understand it, they plan for it. And so you tie your sustainability resilience goals to their business goals, and you find they really coincide.
Yeah, this is Whit. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I almost see it the opposite way. I think that probably every Fortune 500 company out there has a chief sustainability and resiliency officer right now. It's really making sure the states and the municipalities put those positions in place at an executive level that's well funded and sustainable. And I think that's where you get leadership on these issues. And Mayor Trantalis, I just have to say one thing. You said that wastewater ribbon cutting ceremonies aren't something that we've seen a lot of. I agree, but Mayor Castor has told me that she will be the wastewater mayor if that's what it takes to get these projects funded. She is proud to carry that title. So,
I would just say that, and these are all good points. The thing about our 4 cities is that they get a lot of visitors. Like Tampa, we just gave them a Super Bowl handoff a few months ago, and they've got the next Super Bowl. But we all are pretty well-known cities that get a lot of people visiting. And I think what Mayor Johnson said is very important about the business case analysis. I have found that it's not that hard among businesses and even among residents for them to understand the long-term needs. Often government doesn't do long-term stuff particularly well because as mayors, we know that almost everything we do will likely be some other mayor doing the ribbon cutting. Okay, anything maybe years and years before it comes to fruition, but you sort of do it because you know that it's the right thing to do. And resiliency is even more so because if you do it right, you're actually, it'll never happen. In other words, the flooding won't occur in 10 years and nobody will really think back to whatever the heck you did. But the business case analysis does give people a sense of why we're doing it now. When we hired ICF to do it, what we did is we went to our residential and commercial neighborhoods, and we have very high property values, and we showed them what the difference was in the areas we've already done our work and in the areas that we haven't. And it was very clear the property values were much stronger in the areas where we've raised the streets and where we've improved the resiliency. So trying to make obviously the case that for a resident or for a business owner or property owner, and we have some pretty big properties, that it makes a heck of a lot of sense. In fact, they shouldn't be afraid of this. They should be wanting it first. And they should embrace it. And so hopefully that will happen. But we actually paid an outfit to do a pretty big study to prove the point, or at least to test the point, which fortunately was proved.
I want to just, before Beth gets to the next question, I want to make a quick observation of something the 4 of you said. One of the questions I was thinking of asking if we had time was, as cutting edge leaders on these issues, what advice can you offer some other city leaders, county leaders, state leaders who are beginning to face these problems? And I think what you all just said, the 4 of you, literally said collaboration, planning, collaboration, building constituencies of interest. The business community has a lot to say on areas, and they have a voice for part of the constituencies that listen to the businesses by virtue of either their employees or their business leaders in the community. But ultimately, the residents who pay some of the taxes as well, there's a little bit of the not in my backyard story that you have to deal with as well. And that's always something that, you have to build the story, you have to build support. You can't force this on people and make it work. But at the same time, you can't pick and choose parts of your community. We're going to do it here or not there. I mean, ultimately, it's a community as a whole. You're elected to represent the whole area, and you want to make the quality of life better. So I think what you all have offered today in this particular little conversation is the fact that you all are doing that job of leading on building interests, common interests, because that's much easier to get the public to support what you're doing and to pay for it.
Right.
Next question, Beth.
Thank you.
Actually, Ron, excuse me.
Sure.
I've got I have a 2 o'clock commitment that I have. I didn't know it was going to take us back 2 o'clock, so I have to leave the meeting at this point. I apologize.
Thank you for being part of our discussion. Fort Lauderdale has a lot to say here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I thought that your comment just now was a good wrap-up of what we've been saying. And I just want to say to Mayor Johnson, unfortunately, Fort Lauderdale doesn't suffer the inconvenience of historical markers that we have to dig around in order to preserve our infrastructure. I wish we did, but we're a much newer city. But anyway, thank you all for inviting me on this conference, and thank you, Ron, for all the work that you do. And let's just keep the faith and make sure that we're able to preserve our. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I think we're going to get close to wrapping up here. But Beth, did you have one more question that came from the audience?
Yes, if you guys would be willing, we have another question that kind of builds off the last one coming from Lisa Foster, and she asks, how are you selling developers on spending more now for the long-term benefit of their clients?
I'll go first. And it's not, I mean, look, it's not just developers, it's anyone who owns land. First of all, real estate in Florida has been, by and large, a pretty good investment. It's cyclical, obviously, but I mean, a lot of people have made a lot of money because real estate value has gone up. It's been one of the challenges, frankly, of our state, is that land costs have increased at the same time salaries have not. So it's become a harder, more expensive state to live in. So if you think of all of these parcels as not simply your quality of life issue, but your most important asset, and for most people it is, whether they're a residential or commercial owner, it's not hard to sell them on it. They want it. They want to make sure that that their asset is going to be secure, not just that they can navigate, but that they can they can make more money there. So it hasn't been hard to convince people that it's important. I think one of the real challenges has been in figuring out how to navigate all the different positions people have. We had a meeting a couple months ago where a whole group of people in green shirts came in to complain about a street level rise, and a whole nother neighborhood association was created to take the other side. So we basically had 20 or 30 people at a meeting, pre-COVID obviously, arguing about whether or not we should be raising that particular street. And of course, some people might say, well, I'm going to be selling very soon, so I don't know that I'm staying here for 30 years. I don't know that I want this. And some people saying, this is my asset I'm going to live in for 50 years, presumably, or give to my kids. And they have a different view. So the biggest challenge has been navigating everybody's own lens. But at the end of the day, for us, we put out a plan, we pressure tested it, and we're going to keep doing it. And we're just going to let people know and help them in any way we can to embrace it. But it's not as easy as it might sound, but it's a series of tremendous amounts of meetings where I'm doing a heck of a lot more listening than my wife ever thought I was capable of. But that's sort of what you do in one of these jobs. And actually it's a challenge. I'd rather have this than do something that's simpler and not particularly challenging. It is challenging, but it's actually, I think a lot of people, maybe Mayor Johnson agrees, it's sort of sometimes you get into this because you want the hard challenge and you want to try to solve a complex problem. And I think these are complex.
I would have loved to have done it. I didn't want to do it because it was easy. I surely didn't think about a pandemic and then all this other stuff going on.
A little less complex.
Yeah, I mean, I might have rethought my position, but that's a good question. And to piggyback on Ron's comment, I think that you set it as a strategic goal. For us, we fortunately, I think all of us are in cities where people want to come, they want to be there. And the fact of the matter is, developers and anyone else, they feel the tea leaves. They're able to read and figure out where people are. And so if we're talking about resilience as a strategic goal, people would already know before they even come to you where you're at. Then you have to recognize for us that, it's an all hands on deck scenario. So although the government is talking about resiliency, we have people from the private sector, you have people in your neighborhoods, all talking about resiliency. And so, it's like when you're in Rome, you do what the Romans do. Well, you come into Savannah, that's what Savannahans are talking about. If you want to be successful here, that's something that you could do. And it is about, not about your community ultimately bouncing back to normal, looking through the lens of the pandemic, but it's really about bouncing forward. Resiliency is about being nimble, being able to be flexible enough. And what we will find throughout the country is that communities that have not planned, that are not flexible, does not have flexibility in their DNA, they're going to have a much harder time bouncing forward. because again, the cheese has moved, the dynamics have changed, and so we're going to be in a definitely new normal. And then we said earlier, which makes a lot of sense in Tampa. I mean, you have to have a resilience officer, and you have to have it at an executive level. Here in Savannah, I've only been mayor but 9 months today, but you know, we have a resilience person. It's just a person, and it's kind of a little bit buried in the bureaucracy. We're going to change that, because if you say it's important, your budget shows what things are important to you, and your organizational chart shows what's important to you. And then the final thing, I think you have to fund it. You can't say we have it and then you're not putting any money through it. You're not running any policies through it. And so, you know, we say that, you know, minority women-owned businesses are important. So when we do purchasing, it runs through that lens. And so for things regarding everything else for us, quality of life as it relates to infrastructure and development, then you're also saying, if we're saying sustainability and resiliency, then we have to run that through that lens as well. So, you know, I think people get it, they understand it. I mean, I'm clear, if people did not know today, after listening to all of us on here, they know what cities are talking that language.
Whit, anything to close on that?
I would just say I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the word insurance at this panel. You know, I think your original question was how do you get building owners to take these things seriously? And I think really it runs the gamut of the entire spectrum, whether it's the land, as Mayor Gelber talked about, the developer who's looking to attract a diverse set of stakeholders or tenants or residents, to the lenders and the mortgage lenders and the type of risk they're willing to take, and then ultimately to the operation and the maintenance of the building, which includes a component of insurance. And if you can't build a crappy building in a vulnerable place if you don't have all those things ready and in place to tell a compelling story and to be able to take out the type of insurance policy to protect it, and ultimately have a building that's got a life cycle 50 years, 100 years into the future.
Hey, you know, Ron, just on the insurance issue, so my city has been doing this now for 4 years, I guess, 5 years. CRS ranks you. We got moved up from a class 6 to a class 5. So in 2019, which means that our new flood policies that are renewed after May 1, 2019, receives a 5% discount on their premiums. So that's about $2 million in some savings citywide, but about 8.4 million in savings everywhere. And so our residents now, you know, literally are paying less because they're of these resiliency efforts. And, you know, and when we did our GEO bond, I mentioned the other, you know, because of the resiliency efforts and the bond rating, the interest rate went down. So the day we went to market, the interest rate was reduced because of the demand. We saved $26 million on a single day just because the bonding agency, I think it was S&P, said we were such a good risk. And they mentioned in there because of the resiliency efforts. So, you know, it's still a lot of money to spend, but at the end of the day, if you have these long-term proofs that what you're doing is saving people money and preserving an asset and actually helping their bottom line, which is spectacular, it makes it a lot easier to stomach.
I want to just add, I hate to drop in, but I mean, it's just such good conversation. Also, people are transient. People will move to places that are planning forward. Everybody wants to be on that progressive train, so to speak. And so when you look at people, when you look at the best and brightest, when you look at now the group below millennials, those folks that are going to be the folks that are going to carry our cities into the future, they want to go where there's forward thinking. And so you will find that brain trust going to cities that are sustainable and that are resilient. I mean, those are smart thinking cities, and I want Savannah to be positioned as one of those cities to say, hey, you know, they're really thinking in the future. I want to be here.
What I'm hearing in this conversation today is leadership and listening and building. And the four of you, Mayor Gelber, Mayor Johnson, Mayor Trantalis, and Whit Reamer, on behalf of the Mayor of Tampa, Mayor Castor, you really are taking very sound practices and recognizing, and Mayor Johnson, with your last comment, I agree with you. Young people vote with their feet. and they're going to show up and go to places where it's interesting. Fort Lauderdale is a good example. Miami Beach is a good example. Savannah, Tampa, all these are places where in today's world, today's economy, you can do a job almost anywhere. It depends on the job, but many jobs you can do anywhere. And it's where's the quality of life? Where are the kinds of people that are thinking ahead? They enjoy the urban experience, or they enjoy something about it, but they also want to be in a place that people are thinking that way and operating that way and building that way, because they're going to raise their families there and everything else. And it's also about where they think they can make a good living and be successful. So these are the things that you all are facing as we speak. Some cities around the country are great cities, and they may follow soon behind. The purpose of today's conference, though, was to discuss resiliency. The participants who have been online listening, please take the opportunity to reach out to your panelists and their staff and learn. We have a lot of cities represented as participants here, and you can learn from each other. It is best practices. It is sharing good information. It's learning what works here, what may work there. And that's the purpose of what FAIR did in pulling this together. So I want to thank our panelists. You all are very, very busy people in this day and age right now. But what you shared, I think, is very valuable in the opportunity to spread the good word on the opportunities that we can move forward on this. So FAIR, there are other panels coming up. For those who are listening in, I want to thank everybody for being part of this. I want to turn it back over to Beth for some closing housekeeping.
Yes, thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you again to all of our speakers. I would just like to encourage everyone attending to take the time to go visit our exhibitor booths and learn a little bit more about our sponsors and be entered into a raffle to win a pair of AirPods Pro. In addition, thank you so much for coming to watch this session. At 3 p.m., we have our next panel called Resiliency Through Mitigation with an expert group of people speaking more on how we can encourage community scale mitigation and some more strategies in that realm. So we encourage you all to come back at 3 p.m.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the day.